I paid off my fiance's debt, drove her to work daily, and bought her a Tiffany ring. But then I caught her with another man, and when I confronted her about him, she said, "You just don't trust me because you used to be ugly, and now you think the whole world is out to get you." I just stared at her. That was 9 months ago. This morning, she was standing outside my apartment in tears. This is easy. For my entire life, I was always the ugly kid. It didn't matter what class I transferred to. All the way through college, I was always the uglies. I don't even mean like I was fat and could lose the weight. I mean chicken little ugly duckling. I had a crazy overbite, wrinkles that made me look old, teeth that never grew back, perpetual raccoon eyes, and obesity that Ozempic couldn't fix. Miraculously, I had my first kiss at 30 years old from the love of my life, Lucia. The first time I saw her, she looked at me with this sort of, "He's so ugly, but I can't stop looking because it's gross" face, especially since she looked like a ray of sunshine. But mostly she treated me like I was normal, and that was everything. And she told me I was her first time for everything too. It really felt like we were a match made in heaven. So I insisted on paying for the wedding, and even told her she could cut her hours down by half at work, because I would send money to make up for it. And of course, she was all for it, because all her friends and family loved me too. So one night, we were at her place with her friend Naomi just hanging out. I had made us all Aperol spritzes, her favorite, so it's safe to say they were buzzed. Meanwhile, I stayed sober to make sure I could take care of her if anything happened. We were all on the topic of godparents, and Naomi promised that when we had a child, she'd do anything for it. So she was the best pick. That's when she said it, the phrase that turned my life upside down. Plus, Mike, you work so hard. You need to have a parental safety net. Nausea crept in before I could stop it, because my name isn't Mike. But then I smelled the alcohol on her breath and was reminded of how hammered she was. I was literally just about to make a joke about it until she continued. "Lucia told me you have a huge operation coming up. It must be so stressful being a surgeon." My eyebrows furrowed. I was a lawyer, not a surgeon. I looked at Lucia. She pulled her lips back to smile, but the rest of her face was completely still. Alarm bells were ringing in every organ of my body. There was a moment of silence, and that's when Naomi ran to the bathroom to throw up, except there were no vomiting sounds. It sounded like she was just scrolling on TikTok. I didn't want to assume the worst, so I gave my fiancé time to explain herself. "Lucia, who is Mike?" "He's Naomi's boyfriend," she said with a sigh. "Why does everything always have to be a fight between us?" I couldn't even recall one fight we had, because I always let her have her way, which meant her response was defensive, which meant she was hiding something. I buried my face in my hands, not wanting to face the truth. "You just don't trust me because you used to be ugly, and now you think the whole world is out to get you." I didn't show it, but that got to me. And that's when she handed me her phone to look through. She watched as I checked the most obvious places. Instagram DMs, Snapchat, iMessage. They were all clear, but that's when I saw it, an app that looked like it was a calculator. I clicked on it, and sure enough, there was another password barrier to get through. But this time, she didn't offer to unlock it. Instead, she started crying, but I didn't feel bad for her, because as I looked at her, all I saw was hundreds of dollars of makeup running down her face, a Cartier watch that sat on her wrist, a Tiffany diamond ring on her finger, all paid for by me. Disgust filled my body. And when Naomi was done throwing up, I told Lucia to leave with her. But the second they left, I broke down. I thought about all the time and money I poured into our relationship, how I paid off her credit card debt, how I drove her to and from work every day, even if it meant being late to my own job, how I had cut off half my friends to make her feel more comfortable, all so she could destroy it. And that anger is what led me to pay for an Uber to Naomi's house. Lucia was the one to open the door. "Why are you always trying to start something?" "I effing hate you," I interrupted her. "You think another man is going to want you now? You think that little guy on your phone is going to provide for you? You're 30. The best years of your life are over." She laughed. "Oh, and you think any woman will want you? Every time you touched me, I had to close my eyes and picture someone else." By that point, I had had enough of Lucia. I turned the corner and waited for my Uber to arrive. When I got home, I spent the entire night clutching my pillow, crying until my head was pounding. I woke up the next morning to the sound of my phone buzzing. It was my mom. I didn't pick up. Turns out it was one of the dozens of calls I had missed. Not just from my mom, but my dad, Lucia, and Naomi too. Turns out Lucia had told everyone I was abusive, and I had abandoned her. I stared at my phone screen, watching the missed call count climb higher. 23 from mom, 15 from dad, 8 from my brother. Even my cousins were calling. My hands shook as I scrolled through the text messages flooding in. Mom's messages started gentle, but grew increasingly frantic. The first one asked if I was okay. The second wondered why I wasn't answering. By the 10th, she was demanding to know what I had done to that poor girl. My stomach churned as I read her words describing how Lucia had called them sobbing at 3 in the morning, barely able to speak through her tears. I stumbled to my laptop and opened Facebook. The first thing I saw made my blood run cold. Lucia had changed her relationship status to single and posted a lengthy status update. My eyes scanned the words, each sentence hitting like a physical blow. She described years of emotional manipulation, jealousy, and control. She claimed I monitored her every move, isolated her from friends, and flew into rages over innocent interactions with male coworkers. The comment section was already filling with supportive messages. People I'd known for years were calling me a monster. My own aunt had commented that she always suspected something was off about me. Former coworkers shared stories about how I seemed possessive at company events. Each comment built on the last, creating a narrative I didn't recognize. My work phone started buzzing on a Sunday morning. My boss never called on weekends unless something was seriously wrong. I let it go to voicemail, already knowing what this was about. Our law firm had a reputation to maintain. Social media scandals involving domestic abuse allegations weren't something they'd tolerate. I checked my own phone's sent messages, hoping to find some evidence of what I'd actually said to Lucia last night. My heart stopped. There were texts I didn't remember sending. Angry, rambling messages sent at 2:47 a.m., long after I thought I'd fallen asleep. The words were mine, but twisted, taken out of context. One message read, "You'll pay for this betrayal." Another said, "I won't let you destroy everything I've built." The timestamps showed these were sent after our confrontation at Naomi's house, but I had been home, crying into my pillow. How could I have sent these? I checked my phone's location history. It showed I'd been at my apartment all night, but the messages were there, clear as day. A knock at my door made me jump. Through the peephole, I saw my neighbor, Mrs. Chen. She usually brought me cookies on holidays and asked about my work. Now her face looked concerned, almost frightened. I opened the door slightly. She took a step back when she saw me. Her daughter stood behind her, phone in hand. They'd seen the posts. Mrs. Chen stammered something about checking if I was all right, but her eyes darted nervously. Her daughter whispered something about calling someone if needed. They retreated quickly down the hallway. My phone buzzed with a text from Lucia. "I never wanted it to go this far, but you forced my hand. We need to talk before this gets worse for both of us." The message felt like a trap. Everything felt like a trap now. I scrolled through her Facebook photos. New images had been posted. Lucia with a bruise on her upper arm that definitely hadn't been there yesterday. The bruise looked fresh, purple, and angry against her skin. The caption read, "Finally brave enough to share what I've been hiding." My mind raced. When could she have gotten that bruise? We hadn't had any physical contact in days. Our confrontation last night involved no touching at all. I'd kept my distance, standing by the door the entire time. More notifications flooded in. Lucia had tagged me in posts dating back months, adding new captions about red flags and warning signs. A photo from my birthday dinner now had a caption about how I'd forced her to attend and monitored every conversation. A picture from her sister's wedding described how I'd isolated her from family at the event. My brother called again. This time I answered. His voice was cold, disappointed. He asked one question. "Did you hit her?" The question knocked the wind out of me. I tried to explain about the affair, about Mike, about the calculator app, but my words sounded paranoid, desperate. He cut me off, telling me I needed help, professional help. He mentioned that Lucia had been in touch with our parents for weeks, expressing concerns about my escalating behavior. Weeks. She'd been planning this for weeks. I thought back to every interaction, every moment that might have been staged, the times she'd asked me to pay for things, insisting I photograph the receipts for our budget, the way she'd encouraged me to text her throughout the day, saying she missed me so much when I was at work, how she'd asked me to pick pick her up from places at odd hours, creating a pattern of behavior that looked controlling from the outside. My laptop dinged with an email notification. My boss had sent a formal message requesting a Monday morning meeting to discuss recent developments affecting the firm's reputation. The partners had been made aware of serious allegations on social media. I was to bring any relevant documentation that might help clarify the situation. What documentation could possibly help? How do you prove you didn't do something? How do you show the absence of abuse? Every loving gesture I'd made now looked like evidence of obsession. Every gift seemed like manipulation. Every text checking on her welfare appeared possessive. I called Jake, my best friend since college. His girlfriend answered. Her voice was ice. Jake didn't want to talk to someone who hurt women. She hung up before I could respond. 15 years of friendship ended with one phone call. The calculated nature of Lucia's campaign became clearer with each passing minute. She turned my family against me before I even knew there was a war. She planted seeds of doubt in everyone's minds. Now those seeds were blooming into full-blown conviction of my guilt. I tried calling my parents again. Dad answered this time. His voice was measured, careful. He spoke to me like I was dangerous, unstable. He mentioned texts I'd supposedly sent Lucia threatening to ruin her life and make her pay. He said Lucia had forwarded screenshots. The words sounded like things I'd said in anger, but twisted, recontext, made sinister. That's when I realized the most terrifying part. Some of these texts might actually be real. Things I'd said in the heat of our argument, words chosen in anger, now stripped of context and presented as threats. Others seemed fabricated or altered, but how could I prove which was which? My social media accounts were hemorrhaging friends. People I'd known for years were unfriending me, blocking me. My college roommate posted about standing with survivors and believing women. My law school study group was discussing whether they'd ever seen warning signs during our time together. Each refresh brought new devastation. Lucia's narrative was spreading like wildfire, and I was helpless to stop it. Every potential defense made me look worse. Claiming she was lying made me seem like a typical abuser denying responsibility. Pointing out inconsistencies appeared as gaslighting. Even my silence was interpreted as guilt. I made the decision to hire a private investigator. If I could prove the affair with Mike, maybe people would understand why I'd been upset. But when I called the first PI in the phone book, he listened to my story with professional detachment before warning me. Any investigation into Lucia now would look like stalking. Following her, photographing her, digging into her life, all standard PI work, would confirm her narrative of me as an obsessed ex who couldn't let go. I was trapped. Every move I could make had been anticipated and countered before I even knew I was playing. Lucia had thought of everything. She'd created a scenario where my innocence was impossible to prove, because the very act of trying to prove it made me look guilty. The bruise in her photos haunted me. When had she taken those? How had she gotten them? The timing seemed impossible unless they'd been planned. Unless this entire situation had been orchestrated from the beginning. I thought about our relationship differently now. Every fight we'd never had because I'd always given in. Every friend I distanced myself from at her request. Every financial decision that had slowly made me her sole support. It all looked different in this new light. My phone rang. An unknown number. I answered cautiously. It was Naomi. Her voice was different now. Careful and formal. She was calling to clear things up. She claimed she'd never said anything about Mike being a surgeon. She insisted I must have misheard because I'd been drinking. The gaslighting was so blatant it took my breath away. I'd been completely sober. She knew that. But now the story was different. She ended the call by saying she was concerned about my mental state and hoped I would get the help I needed. Every word sounded rehearsed, like she was reading from a script or recording the conversation. The walls were closing in. In less than 24 hours, I'd gone from discovering my fiancé's affair to being branded an abuser. My support system was crumbling. My career was in jeopardy. My reputation was destroyed. And somewhere out there, Lucia was with Mike, probably watching this all unfold exactly as she'd planned. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by the remnants of our life together. Photos of us smiling at cameras, her engagement ring still in its box on my dresser, the wedding planning binders she'd left behind, all of it evidence of a relationship that had apparently never been what I thought. The cruelest part was that I still didn't fully understand why. Was it just about Mike? Had she met someone with more money, better looks, higher status? Or was this about something else entirely? The complete destruction seemed too thorough for a simple affair exit strategy. My laptop showed 17 new emails, former colleagues expressing disappointment, friends saying they needed space to process, each one accepting Lucia's version of events without question. The court of public opinion had reached its verdict, and I hadn't even known I was on trial. As the sun set on the worst day of my life, I realized this was only the beginning. Lucia's campaign was too well orchestrated to stop here. There would be more revelations, more evidence, more careful escalations. She'd laid the groundwork too carefully to abandon it now. I was right. My phone buzzed with a new notification. Lucia had filed for a restraining order, citing harassment and threats. The legal system was now involved. The next phase of her plan was beginning. I stared at the notification about the restraining order, my hands trembling. The document had been filed electronically at 8:47 p.m. on Friday, 3 days before our confrontation, 3 days before I discovered the affair. The timestamp proved Lucia had been preparing for this moment, anticipating my discovery and planning her counterattack. My phone buzzed again. Jake had texted asking me not to contact him anymore. His girlfriend felt unsafe knowing I had his number. The message included a screenshot of Lucia's latest post, describing how I'd shown up at Naomi's house uninvited and threatened her. The post had over 200 reactions already. I needed legal help immediately. My fingers fumbled as I searched for attorneys specializing in false accusations. The first 3 firms I called had already seen the social media posts. 2 declined to represent me outright. The third suggested I seek counseling before pursuing legal action. Each rejection felt like another wall closing in. The 4th attorney agreed to meet me, but only at his office with his assistant present. When I arrived, I found myself signing multiple forms acknowledging the meeting was being recorded for everyone's safety. The attorney listened to my story with practiced neutrality, occasionally glancing at his assistant who took notes on every word. He reviewed the restraining order filing and the evidence Lucia had submitted. Page after page of text messages I'd sent over our relationship, each one carefully selected to paint a picture of obsession. Messages asking where she was, messages saying I missed her, messages offering to pick her up, all innocent in context, all damning in isolation. The attorney explained that fighting the restraining order would require proving Lucia's bad faith, but any investigation into her activities would strengthen her claims of stalking. He suggested accepting the order and focusing on damage control. The legal fees for even this consultation would cost me $3,000. Back at my apartment, I discovered my work email access had been suspended. The automated message informed me that IT had locked my account pending the Monday meeting. My income, my career, my entire professional life hung by a thread that Lucia controlled. I spent hours creating a timeline of events, documenting everything I could remember. But as I wrote, I realized how paranoid it looked. Pages of notes about Lucia's behavior, detailed observations of our interactions, screenshots of her social media. Any reasonable person reviewing these materials would see an obsessed ex-boyfriend building a case against his victim. My brother arrived unannounced that evening. He stood in my doorway, refusing to come inside, and handed me a printout of Lucia's posts. He pointed to specific phrases she'd used, asking if I recognized them. They were things I'd said, but twisted, recontextualized. A joke about keeping her safe became evidence of control. A comment about not trusting her friend became isolation tactics. He informed me that our parents were considering an intervention. They'd been in contact with a therapist who specialized in helping families deal with abusive relatives. The therapist had reviewed Lucia's documentation and felt I showed classic signs of an emotional abuser in denial. My brother left without letting me explain, without hearing my side. The weekend crawled by in a haze of refreshing social media and watching my life crumble in real time. Lucia posted photos from a safe house where she was staying, thanking friends for their support. The backgrounds looked suspiciously like Mike's apartment from his social media, but pointing that out would only prove I was stalking both of them. By Sunday night, a local domestic domestic violence advocacy group had shared Lucia's story. They praised her courage in speaking out and offered resources for other survivors. The post included statistics about how abusers often seemed charming and generous to outsiders. My financial support of Lucia was reframed as a classic control tactic. Monday morning arrived with brutal certainty. I put on my best suit, gathered my pathetic folder of documentation, and drove to the office. The security guard who usually greeted me warmly now checked my ID twice and made a phone call before allowing me upstairs. Eyes followed me through the lobby. Whispered conversations stopped as I passed. The conference room held 3 senior partners, the head of HR and a security guard. They'd arranged the seating so I was isolated on one side of the table, facing what felt like a tribunal. The managing partner opened by saying they'd been made aware of serious allegations that could damage the firm's reputation. I tried to present my side, but every piece of evidence I offered was met with skepticism. The hidden calculator app sounded like paranoid jealousy. The timeline of Lucia's posts seemed obsessive. My claims about Mike were dismissed as deflection. The bruise photos were particularly damning, even though I insisted I'd never touched her. The head of HR produced printed screenshots of my social media activity. Not posts I'd made, but pages I'd viewed. Lucia's profile, Mike's profile, Naomi's profile. The firm's IT system had flagged my concerning browsing patterns during work hours. They had timestamps showing I'd checked Lucia's page dozens of times even before our confrontation. The partners exchanged glances as I tried to explain. I was gathering evidence, trying to understand what was happening. But they heard a man stalking his ex-girlfriend using company resources. The security guard shifted uncomfortably as my voice rose in frustration. The managing partner delivered the verdict with practiced professionalism. Given the nature of the allegations and the potential impact on the firm's reputation, they were placing me on indefinite unpaid leave pending a full investigation. I would need to surrender my keycard, laptop, and any client files immediately. The security guard would escort me to clean out my desk. The walk to my office felt endless. Colleagues averted their eyes or suddenly found urgent tasks requiring their attention elsewhere. My assistant had already boxed up my personal items. She handed me the box without making eye contact, mumbling something about hoping I got help. The security guard watched as I emptied my desk drawers. Every item I touched seemed to carry the weight of my crumbling life. Awards for legal excellence, photos from firm events, a coffee mug Lucia had given me for our anniversary. All of it went into the box while my former colleagues pretended not to watch. In the parking garage, I sat in my car staring at the box of my professional life. 10 years of building a career, destroyed in a single morning. My phone buzzed with a notification from HR. They'd already updated my LinkedIn to show I was no longer with the firm. The digital erasure of my professional existence took less time than the meeting itself. I drove home in a daze, the box sliding around in my back seat with each turn. The radio played news about supporting domestic violence survivors. Even the universe seemed aligned against me. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The stress had aged me years in just days. My apartment building's parking lot held an unwelcome surprise. My parents' car sat in visitor parking. Through my windshield, I could see them waiting by the entrance with someone I didn't recognize. A woman in professional attire holding a folder. The therapist, presumably. I considered driving away, but where would I go? My credit cards were linked to accounts Lucia knew about. My friends had abandoned me. My family had turned against me. Running would only confirm their beliefs about my instability. The intervention unfolded in my own living room. The therapist introduced herself with calm authority, explaining she specialized in helping men recognize and address abusive behavior patterns. My parents sat on either side of her, their faces masks of concern and disappointment. She produced a workbook titled Accepting Accountability, A Journey to Change. The pages outlined a 12-week program for emotional abusers. Step 1 was acknowledging the harm caused. Step 2 was taking responsibility without deflection. Each step led further from the truth and deeper into Lucia's narrative. My mother cried as she described how Lucia had confided in her for months about my jealousy. She mentioned specific incidents I remembered differently. The time I'd surprised Lucia at work with lunch became an example of checking up on her. The weekend I'd planned for her birthday was recast as isolation from friends. My father's disappointment cut deeper than my mother's tears. He spoke about raising me better than this, about failing as a parent. He mentioned his own father's temper, wondering if abusive tendencies were hereditary. The comparison to my grandfather, a man I'd barely known, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. The therapist took notes as I tried to explain. Every denial was met with gentle pushback about deflection and minimization. She had clinical terms for every protest. My insistence on innocence was typical abuser behavior. My evidence of Lucia's affair was blame shifting. My emotional responses were manipulation tactics. They'd brought printed copies of Lucia's posts, highlighting specific passages. The therapist asked me to read them aloud and explain my perspective on each incident, but every explanation sounded like an excuse. Every context I provided seemed like justification for inexcusable behavior. The intervention lasted 3 hours. By the end, I was exhausted, defeated, and no closer to convincing them of the truth. They left me with the workbook, contact information for the therapist, and an ultimatum. Enter treatment voluntarily, or they would have to distance themselves for their own emotional well-being. After they left, I sat in the silence of my apartment. The workbook lay on my coffee table like an accusation. Opening it meant accepting a lie, but refusing meant losing the last family connections I had. The choice between truth and survival had never been starker. My phone, silent for hours during the intervention, suddenly exploded with notifications. Lucia had posted again. This time, she'd shared a photo of legal documents. The restraining order had been granted. A judge had reviewed her evidence and found it credible enough to issue a protective order. The order prohibited me from coming within 500 feet of Lucia, her home, or her workplace. It specifically mentioned Mike's address as a location where she could be found. The legal system had officially recognized Mike's apartment as a place Lucia needed protection from me. Reading the details, I noticed something chilling. The order mentioned specific incidents I'd never been accused of before. Times and dates when I'd allegedly followed her, watched her, made her feel unsafe. The incidents coincided with times I'd been home alone, but I had no way to prove my whereabouts. The private investigator I'd contacted earlier called back. He'd done preliminary research and discovered something interesting. Mike's social media history showed connections to Lucia dating back over a year. Photos from group events where they'd both been present, comments on each other's posts that seemed innocuous but took on new meaning and context. But the investigator warned me again about proceeding. Any documentation of this research would look like continued stalking. The restraining order made any investigation into Lucia's activities potentially criminal. I was trapped between proving my innocence and avoiding prison. That evening, I made the mistake of checking social media one more time. The local news had picked up Lucia's story. A segment on supporting abuse survivors featured her story as an example of courage in the face of adversity. They'd blurred my face in the photos but kept enough detail that anyone who knew us would recognize me. The news segment included an interview with the domestic violence advocate who'd shared Lucia's story. She spoke about the importance of believing survivors and the danger of allowing abusers to control the narrative. Every word felt directed at me, though I'd never met this woman. My work email, though suspended, still received messages. I could see the subject lines piling up in my phone's preview. Clients asking about the status of their cases. Colleagues expressing shock. One subject line simply read, "Is it true?" I couldn't access any of them to respond. The financial reality hit next. With my work income suspended, I had limited savings to cover expenses. The attorney's retainer had already depleted a significant portion. The credit cards I'd used to support Lucia were maxed out from her shopping sprees. The joint accounts had been frozen as part of the restraining order proceedings. I spent hours calculating my financial runway. At current expenses, I had maybe 2 months before bankruptcy. Less if I hired an attorney to fight the restraining order. The financial control I'd allegedly wielded over Lucia had become my own prison. Tuesday morning brought new challenges. The landlord called to express concerns about the situation. Other tenants had seen the news coverage and felt uncomfortable. While he couldn't evict me without cause, he suggested it might be better better for everyone if I found alternative housing. The apartment I'd shared with Lucia, filled with memories and remnants of our life together, was no longer a sanctuary. Neighbors who'd smiled in the hallway now avoided eye contact. The building's social media group had a thread discussing whether management should take action. I began looking for new apartments, but every application required employment verification and references. With my job suspended and my reputation destroyed, no landlord would consider me. The housing website seemed to mock me with their requirements for stable income and good character references. My car insurance company called next. They'd received notice of the restraining order and needed to update their records. The agent explained that my rates would increase due to the high-risk behavior associated with domestic violence allegations. Even my ability to drive was being systematically compromised. Wednesday arrived with a process server at my door. Lucia was filing for a civil suit seeking damages for emotional distress, lost wages from feeling unsafe at work, and therapy costs. The lawsuit claimed a pattern of abuse dating back years, with specific incidents that grew more elaborate with each telling. The civil suit documents included affidavits from witnesses I'd never met, people who claimed to have seen me following Lucia, watching her apartment, making her uncomfortable in public spaces. The dates aligned with times I'd been working late or home alone, but proving my innocence required evidence I'd never thought to collect. My attorney reviewed the civil suit and delivered more bad news. Fighting it would cost tens of thousands of dollars I didn't have. Even if I won, the legal fees would bankrupt me. He suggested negotiating a settlement, essentially paying Lucia to drop the suit. The extortion was legal and completely above board. The therapist my parents had hired called to schedule our first session. She framed it as an opportunity for growth and healing. I agreed, not because I believed I needed treatment, but because refusing would cost me my family. The appointment was set for Thursday afternoon. That night, unable to sleep, I made the mistake of searching for information about false abuse allegations. The internet offered little comfort. Stories of men whose lives had been destroyed by fabricated accusations filled forum after forum. Some had eventually proven their innocence, but only after years of legal battles and financial ruin. The most chilling discovery was how rare successful defenses were. The system, designed to protect genuine victims, had few safeguards against manipulation. The presumption of belief for accusers meant the accused started from a position of guilt. Evidence of innocence was viewed with suspicion, while evidence of guilt was accepted readily. Thursday's therapy session took place in a sterile office building. The therapist maintained professional distance while guiding me through intake paperwork. Questions about my history of violence, none. Substance abuse, none. And previous relationships, limited, filled pages of forms. She explained the program structure: weekly individual sessions, bi-weekly group sessions with other perpetrators, and homework assignments focused on accountability. The cost would be $300 per session, not covered by insurance due to the nature of the treatment. Another financial drain on my dwindling resources. The first session focused on my childhood and family dynamics. Every normal childhood frustration was examined for signs of nascent abusive tendencies. My academic focus was reframed as need for control. My lack of romantic relationships before Lucia became evidence of social dysfunction. I played along, giving the answers I knew she wanted to hear, admitting to jealousy I hadn't felt, acknowledging control issues that didn't exist. Each false confession felt like betraying myself, but the alternative was complete isolation. After the session, I sat in my car in the parking garage, feeling hollowed out. The therapist had given me homework: write a letter to Lucia acknowledging the harm I'd caused, not sending it, just writing it. The exercise was meant to help me process my actions. Instead, it felt like being forced to draft my own conviction. Friday brought the meeting with my employer's HR department. They completed their investigation and reached a decision. The firm couldn't risk the reputational damage of keeping someone accused of domestic violence on staff. They offered a severance package with strict conditions. I would resign voluntarily, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and waive any right to legal action. The severance would provide 2 months of salary, enough to survive slightly longer, but not enough to mount any meaningful legal defense. Refusing meant being fired for cause, losing any severance, and having termination for misconduct on my record. Another non-choice in a series of impossible decisions. I signed the papers with a hand that barely felt like my own. 10 years of career growth, professional relationships, and legal practice ended with a signature. The HR representative maintained professional sympathy while ensuring I understood the terms. My company email was deleted while I sat there. The security guard escorted me out one final time. Former colleagues pretended not to see me pass. The elevator ride to the parking garage felt like descending into a bottomless pit. Each floor marker reminded me of cases I'd worked, victories I'd achieved, a life I'd built that no longer existed. That afternoon, I began the humiliating process of updating my resume and LinkedIn profile. How do you explain being unemployed due to false domestic violence allegations? Every truthful explanation sounded like an abuser's denial. Every vague explanation invited investigation that would uncover the allegations. The weekend brought more social media discoveries. Lucia and Mike had made their relationship Facebook official. The announcement post carefully avoided mentioning how long they'd been together, but the comments celebrated her finding happiness after escaping abuse. Their friends congratulated them on their courage in pursuing love despite the challenges. Photos showed them at restaurants I'd taken Lucia to, wearing jewelry I'd bought her, living a life funded by my financial support. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. I'd paid for the very relationship that destroyed mine. Every gift I'd given her now adorned her new life with Mike. My bank account dwindled with each passing day. Therapy sessions, legal consultations, and basic living expenses ate through my savings. The credit cards I couldn't pay sent increasingly urgent notices. The financial stability I'd worked years to build crumbled in weeks. Sunday night, I finally opened the workbook from the intervention. The exercises focused on recognizing abusive patterns and taking responsibility. One section asked me to list ways I'd controlled my partner. Another wanted me to explore the roots of my violent tendencies. Each page assumed guilt and demanded confession. I started writing the letter to Lucia that my therapist had assigned, not because I believed I'd done anything wrong, but because I needed to show progress. The words felt like swallowing glass, apologizing for pain I hadn't caused, taking responsibility for actions I hadn't taken, creating a fiction that would become my truth if I repeated it enough. As I wrote, I realized this was Lucia's ultimate victory, not just destroying my life, but forcing me to participate in my own destruction. Every therapy session, every false confession, every step toward accountability took me further from the truth and deeper into her narrative. The letter grew longer as I crafted the confession everyone wanted to hear. I wrote about jealousy and control, about failing to respect boundaries, about the harm my actions had caused. None of it was true, but truth had become irrelevant. Survival required accepting the lie. My phone buzzed with a notification. Another mutual friend had unfriended me on social media. My contacts list grew shorter each day as people distanced themselves from the pariah I'd become. Soon, the only people left would be those professionally obligated to interact with me. The isolation was perhaps the cruelest part of Lucia's campaign. Humans are social creatures, and she'd systematically severed every connection I had. Family, friends, colleagues, neighbors, all turned against me by a carefully crafted narrative I couldn't counter without seeming more guilty. I looked around my apartment at the remnants of my former life. Photos I should probably throw away. Gifts from people who no longer spoke to me. Mementos from a relationship that had apparently never been real. The physical artifacts of an existence I could no longer claim. Tomorrow would bring another therapy session, another set of exercises and false accountability. The group session later in the week would introduce me to other abusers working on their issues. I wondered how many of them were like me, innocent but trapped in a system that demanded guilt. The workbook lay open on my coffee table, its exercises half completed. Each answer took me further from who I knew myself to be, and closer to who everyone believed I was. The transformation from victim to perpetrator was nearly complete, and I'd been forced to orchestrate it myself. As midnight approached, I saved the letter to Lucia in a file labeled therapy homework. The document would never be sent, but its existence proved my compliance with treatment, evidence of my journey toward accepting responsibility for crimes I hadn't committed. My reflection in the laptop screen screen showed a man I barely recognized. The stress had carved new lines in my face. My eyes held a defeated quality I'd never seen before. The physical transformation matched the psychological one Lucia had orchestrated. The next phase of her plan was becoming clear. The civil suit would drain any remaining resources I had. The therapy would continue reshaping my identity. The professional destruction would ensure I never recovered financially. The social isolation would prevent any support system from forming. I closed the laptop and prepared for bed, knowing sleep would bring little relief. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new humiliations, new steps in the forced march toward accepting a false narrative. The truth had become a luxury I could no longer afford. The restraining order documents sat on my dresser, a daily reminder of the legal barriers between me and any attempt to clear my name. 500 feet might as well have been 5,000 miles. The distance was measured not in feet, but in the impossibility of ever bridging the gap between truth and perception. My phone showed one final notification before I turned it off. An email from the therapy program confirming my enrollment in the next group session. The subject line read, "Beginning your journey to change." The journey led nowhere I wanted to go, but every other path had been systematically blocked. I stared at the therapy program email, knowing tomorrow's group session would introduce me to other men branded as abusers. The hospital cafeteria job I'd managed to secure started Monday. Working in the same building as Mike felt like cosmic punishment, but with my savings nearly depleted, I had no choice. That weekend, I made one final attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. I remembered the shared cloud storage account Lucia and I had created for wedding planning. She'd probably forgotten about it in the chaos of her campaign. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard before typing in the password. The account opened. Folders of venue photos, catering menus, and guest lists filled the screen. But there, buried in a subfolder labeled personal, I found what I'd been searching for. Screenshots of conversations between Lucia and Mike dating back 14 months. Photos of them together at events where I'd thought she was with friends. Most damning of all, a document where they'd planned their exit strategy, complete with timelines for the abuse allegations. My hands shook as I downloaded everything. Here was proof. Undeniable evidence that their affair predated any supposed abuse. Messages where they mocked my appearance, calling me the troll, and joking about how grateful I was for any attention. Plans to use my financial support to fund their life together once I was dealt with. The evidence felt like vindication and poison simultaneously. I had proof of my innocence, but obtaining it through her cloud account without permission was illegal. The very act of gathering evidence had created a new crime. I'd walked directly into another trap. Monday morning arrived with the humiliation of donning a food service uniform. The hospital's HR department had flagged my file with security concerns. I needed an escort to move between designated areas. My badge restricted access to the cafeteria and nothing else. Every security guard knew my face from the briefing about the domestic violence perpetrator working in their building. During my lunch break, I saw Mike in the cafeteria with colleagues. He was regaling them with stories about his new relationship, loud enough for me to hear every word. He described upgrading from Lucia's ex and made jokes about desperate, ugly guys who think money can buy love. His colleagues laughed uncomfortably, some glancing in my direction. I pulled out my phone and hit record, keeping it low and casual. Mike's voice carried clearly as he continued his cruel mockery. He even mentioned specific details about our relationship that only Lucia could have told him. Evidence of their connection, their planning, their cruelty. But as I saved the recording, I realized the trap I'd walked into again. Recording someone without consent in our state was illegal. Using this evidence would result in additional criminal charges. Every attempt to defend myself created new crimes. Tuesday's therapy session took an unexpected turn. The therapist had noticed my progress with the accountability exercises and wanted to discuss next steps. She suggested I might benefit from speaking with the hospital chaplain about forgiveness and moving forward. It seemed like a genuine attempt to help, so I agreed. The chaplain listened with practiced compassion as I spoke about struggling with forgiveness. Not forgiving Lucia, but forgiving myself for the pain I'd supposedly caused. I chose my words carefully, maintaining the fiction while seeking some form of spiritual guidance. For a moment, I felt almost human again. That feeling shattered Wednesday morning when my probation officer called. The chaplain had reported our conversation as concerning. My focus on the woman I'd hurt rather than my own healing suggested I was still obsessed with my victim. The chaplain's well-meaning report had become another brick in the wall of evidence against me. Desperation drove me to make the worst decision yet. I showed my therapist the evidence from Lucia's cloud account, the screenshots, the photos, the planning documents. I laid it all out, thinking surely a mental health professional would see the truth. Her face went pale as she reviewed the materials, but not with recognition of my innocence. Instead, she saw a dangerous escalation in stalking behavior. Accessing an ex-partner's private accounts, downloading personal communications, obsessively cataloging evidence, these were textbook signs of an abuser who couldn't let go. She asked if I understood why accessing someone's private communications without consent was problematic. The question felt like a knife twisting. Of course I understood, but understanding didn't change my desperation to prove the truth. The therapist informed me she had an obligation to report this concerning development to my probation officer. My attempts to prove my innocence had just provided evidence of escalating criminal behavior. The session ended with her suggesting we increase meeting frequency to twice weekly, adding another financial burden I couldn't afford. Thursday brought the inevitable consequence. Lucia had discovered the cloud account access. Her attorney filed additional charges for cyberstalking and invasion of privacy. The prosecutor added these to my existing case, painting a picture of an abuser whose behavior was escalating despite intervention. My attorney reviewed the new charges with barely concealed frustration. Every action I'd taken had strengthened the case against me. The cloud evidence couldn't be used in my defense because I'd obtained it illegally. Instead, it proved I was continuing to violate Lucia's privacy and boundaries. Friday's group therapy session introduced me to 5 other men, all at various stages of accepting accountability. As we went around the circle sharing our stories, I recognized the same defeated look in their eyes. How many were like me, innocent but trapped? How many had given up protesting their innocence because it only made things worse? The weekend brought Lucia and Mike's wedding announcement on social media. The post described their love as a light that emerged from darkness and thanked everyone who'd supported them through difficult times. They positioned their relationship as a triumph over adversity, with my existence reduced to an obstacle they'd overcome. Comments poured in congratulating them on finding happiness despite everything. People praised Lucia's strength and Mike's patience. Their wedding registry included a donation option for a domestic violence charity. They'd monetized my destruction into wedding gifts. Monday's newspaper included their engagement announcement in the lifestyle section. The brief article mentioned Lucia's advocacy for domestic violence awareness and how she'd found love after escaping an abusive relationship. My name wasn't mentioned, but anyone who knew us would understand the reference. At work, I overheard customers discussing the announcement. 2 women at a nearby table talked about how brave Lucia was for sharing her story. They discussed the warning signs of abuse, using examples that sounded like my relationship with Lucia, but twisted beyond recognition. I cleared their table in silence, invisible in my service uniform. The financial strain reached a breaking point. Between therapy costs, legal fees, and reduced income, I faced eviction. The apartment I'd shared with Lucia, filled with memories now poisoned, would soon be another casualty. I began packing, each item a reminder of a life that no longer existed. My parents called that evening. They'd seen the wedding announcement and wanted to discuss my progress in treatment. They spoke carefully, like I was a dangerous animal they were trying not to provoke. They mentioned possibly attending the wedding to support Lucia's healing journey. My own parents were considering celebrating my destruction. Tuesday's mail brought notice of the cyberstalking trial date. The prosecutor intended to use my illegal access to Lucia's accounts as evidence of an escalating pattern. My attorney advised pleading guilty in exchange for probation extension rather than jail time. Another non-choice in an endless series. The group therapy session that week focused on taking responsibility without minimizing. We were instructed to write public statements acknowledging our abusive behavior. The facilitator explained this was an important step in our victim's healing healing process. Several men read their statements aloud, each word a nail in the coffin of their truth. I spent hours crafting my own statement. Every word had to be perfect, acknowledging harm I hadn't caused while seeming genuine in my remorse. The statement couldn't hint at innocence, or it would be rejected as continued minimization. I wrote and rewrote, each version taking me further from reality. Wednesday brought an unexpected encounter. Sarah, Lucia's friend who'd been at our engagement party, approached me at the hospital cafeteria. She glanced around nervously before sitting at my table during break. Her words were careful, measured. She knew the truth about Lucia and Mike's relationship timeline. She'd seen them together months before I discovered the affair, but she couldn't come forward. Lucia had helped her through a difficult time, and loyalty trumped truth. Besides, she explained, even if she testified about the affair, it wouldn't matter. Infidelity didn't justify abuse. The narrative had taken on a life of its own, bigger than any individual truth. She left me with words that echoed long after. Sometimes being right didn't matter if everyone else needed you to be wrong. Thursday's attorney meeting focused on the plea deal. Accepting guilt for the cyberstalking charges would add another year of probation, but avoid jail time. Fighting the charges would likely result in conviction anyway, plus possible incarceration. The evidence of my guilt was ironclad, even though that evidence was my attempt to prove innocence. I signed the plea agreement with a hand that no longer felt connected to my body. Another admission of guilt for crimes committed while trying to prove I hadn't committed crimes. The spiral tightened with each signature. Friday arrived with the culmination of everything. The courthouse steps were crowded with people attending various hearings. I recognized several faces from social media, Lucia's supporters who'd come to witness justice being served. They held signs about believing survivors and ending domestic violence. Inside the courtroom, Lucia sat with Mike and her attorney. She wore a conservative dress that made her look vulnerable, fragile. The performance was perfect. Mike held her hand protectively, glaring at me with practiced hostility. They'd rehearsed their roles well. The judge reviewed my plea agreement and the statement of responsibility I'd prepared. He asked if I understood the charges and accepted guilt freely. The lie came easily now, worn smooth by repetition. I accepted responsibility for cyberstalking, for invasion of privacy, for causing emotional distress. But the judge wanted more. He asked if I understood the impact of my actions on the victim. This was my moment to perform the final act. I stood and delivered the statement I'd crafted, acknowledging the pain I'd caused, the fear I'd instilled, the healing journey I'd interrupted. The words felt like swallowing broken glass, but I delivered them with apparent sincerity. I spoke about recognizing my jealousy, my control issues, my inability to accept rejection. I thanked the court for the opportunity to get help. I promised to continue working on myself. Lucia cried at appropriate moments. Mike comforted her with visible tenderness. The supporters in the gallery nodded approvingly. Everyone played their assigned roles in this carefully orchestrated performance. The judge accepted my plea and extended the probation. More therapy mandated. Continued no contact orders. Regular check-ins with probation officers. The system working exactly as designed to protect victims and rehabilitate abusers. Justice served. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered statements from Lucia and her supporters. She spoke about feeling validated, about the importance of the system believing survivors. She thanked everyone who'd supported her journey. The cameras captured her brave smile, her graceful survival. I exited through a side door, avoiding the media cluster. But even there, a small group of protesters waited. They recognized me from social media and began chanting about accountability. I walked past them in silence, accepting their anger as part of my penance for crimes I hadn't committed. The walk to my car felt endless. Each step took me further from any hope of vindication and deeper into the reality I'd been forced to accept. In the parking garage, I sat behind the wheel, engine off, staring at nothing. My phone buzzed with notifications. The local news had posted Lucia's statement online. Comments poured in praising her courage, condemning abusers, celebrating justice. My public confession was quoted extensively. The narrative was complete. That evening, I attended my regular therapy session. The therapist praised my courtroom statement as a breakthrough in accepting accountability. She felt we were making real progress. The irony wasn't lost on me, being praised for lying convincingly about crimes I hadn't committed. The group session that week welcomed me differently. Now that I'd publicly accepted responsibility, I was no longer fighting the process. The other men nodded knowingly. I joined their ranks fully, another abuser on the path to redemption. We discussed our statements, our growth, our commitment to change. Saturday brought an unexpected call. My brother wanted to meet at a public place, of course, for safety. Over coffee, he expressed cautious optimism about my progress. The family had seen my courtroom statement. They were willing to consider gradual reintegration if I continued treatment. The price of family connection was perpetual acceptance of a false narrative. Every future interaction would be colored by their belief in my guilt. But isolation was worse than conditional acceptance. I agreed to their terms, another surrender in an endless series. Sunday's social media check revealed the final twist. Mike had posted a photo from months before Lucia claimed we'd met. It showed them together at a concert, clearly intimate. The timestamp proved the affair predated any alleged abuse. He'd posted it accidentally while sharing old memories. Comments started pointing out the discrepancy. Questions arose about the timeline. For a brief moment, it seemed like the truth might finally emerge. But within hours, the post disappeared. A new narrative emerged. Lucia had sought comfort from a friend during a difficult relationship. The affair became retroactive emotional support. My lease ended Monday. I moved into a small studio apartment in a different neighborhood. The hospital job barely covered rent and mandated therapy. The financial control Lucia had accused me of wielding had become my daily reality of scraping by. Tuesday's therapy session focused on future planning. The therapist wanted to discuss long-term goals now that I'd accepted accountability. I spoke about rebuilding trust, continuing treatment, becoming a better person. The lies flowed easily now, practiced and polished. She suggested I might eventually speak at domestic violence awareness events, sharing my journey of accountability. The thought of publicly perpetuating my false guilt to rooms full of people made me nauseous, but I nodded, agreeing it might help others. Wednesday brought news of Lucia and Mike's wedding. Photos flooded social media showing a beautiful ceremony. Lucia glowed with happiness. Mike looked proud and protective. Their friends celebrated love conquering adversity. The narrative of their romance required my villainy to make sense. My parents attended the wedding. They sent me a carefully worded text about supporting healing and moving forward. They'd chosen Lucia's fabricated truth over their son's actual innocence. The betrayal cut deep, but I responded with understanding, playing my role. Thursday's group therapy included a new member. A young man insisted on his innocence, fought the process, refused to accept accountability. The group leader and other men tried to convince him that denial would only make things worse. I watched him struggle against the same system that had crushed me. After the session, I approached him privately. I wanted to warn him, to tell him that fighting would only strengthen the case against him. But what could I say? That innocence didn't matter? That survival required accepting guilt? I walked away, leaving him to discover the truth himself. Friday marked 1 year since discovering Lucia's affair. The man in the mirror bore little resemblance to who I'd been. The stress had aged me dramatically. But more than physical changes, I'd internalized the performance. The false accountability had become reflexive. I attended therapy, worked my job, followed probation requirements. I'd become exactly what the system demanded, a reformed abuser taking responsibility. The truth had become irrelevant to everyone, including me. Survival required accepting the lie. The weekend brought a final realization. I'd become complicit in the system that destroyed me. By accepting false guilt, I'd validated Lucia's lies and reinforced the narrative that all accused must be guilty. My confession would be used to pressure other innocent men to follow the same path. But what choice did I have? Fighting had only created more evidence against me. Every attempt at proving innocence had strengthened my guilt. The system wasn't designed to determine truth, only to process accusations into convictions. I prepared for Monday's therapy session, crafting new insights about my abusive behavior. The performance continued because stopping meant losing everything. Family, work, freedom, all depended on maintaining the lie. In quiet moments, I wondered about truth and justice. They seemed like abstract abstract concepts now, luxuries for people who hadn't been processed by the system. For me, there was only survival through surrender. The story everyone needed was simple. Abusive man gets caught, faces justice, accepts responsibility. The complex truth of false accusations, systematic destruction, and forced confession didn't fit the narrative. So I lived the lie, one day at a time. My phone showed a notification, another therapy appointment reminder, another opportunity to perform accountability, another step away from truth and toward the person everyone needed me to be. I acknowledged the reminder and prepared for another week of careful performance. The man falsely accused of abuse had died. In his place stood a reformed abuser, grateful for the chance to change. The transformation was complete.